The stars shimmered in the distance as the Vraxian Empire's ship descended into the dense atmosphere of an unknown planet. Inside the ship's cold metal walls, there was only the hum of machines, the whispers of officers, and the stillness of a well-oiled, terrifying empire. Evelyn Brooks had known this day was coming. She'd spent years dodging their intelligence networks, hiding behind aliases, hacking their systems in the dark corners of the galaxy. She was a human programmer, one of the best, if not the best, at manipulating the most advanced technology in the universe. But it had all come crashing down when they finally caught her. The Vraxians, an empire spanning 100 star systems, had captured her, and now they were bringing her to the interrogation vault. The vault was the crown jewel of the Vraxian intelligence operations, a facility designed to break even the most resilient minds. Its walls were made of reinforced materials, nearly impossible to penetrate. Inside, the room was filled with a learning AI that could read a person's deepest fears, manipulating both their body and mind, twisting their memories, and turning their very thoughts against them. No one had ever escaped, no one had ever survived. But Evelyn wasn't just anyone. As the guards dragged her through the cold corridors of the Vraxian ship, Evelyn stayed calm, her mind working 1,000 thoughts ahead of them. She had been captured, yes, but she was far from defeated. The Vraxians thought they had her, but they underestimated the one thing they could never control: human ingenuity. They locked her in the vault, a sleek, metallic chamber that hummed with energy. It was so quiet it felt as if the room itself was waiting for her to break. The Vraxians stood outside, monitoring her through the walls. They knew she would break. She had no choice but to submit. One of them, a tall Vraxian officer with a dark crest, spoke into a communicator. "Prepare for initiation. She won't last long." Evelyn took a deep breath as she stood alone in the center of the vault. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the air around her. This room, this machine, this empire, none of it was invincible. She had faced worse, much worse. "They don't know what they've got here," she thought to herself with a smile. "They think they've locked me in, but what they've really done is given me the perfect opportunity." The vault system powered up, a soft hum filling the space. The AI's voice filled the chamber. "Welcome to the vault. You are now under interrogation. Please provide the information you hold about the resistance." Evelyn's lips curled into a smile. "You want to know about the resistance," she said aloud. "Well, let's see if you're ready for it." The system waited for her response, its digital presence curious. But Evelyn wasn't giving answers. She wasn't even close. As she felt the soft vibrations of the vault beneath her feet, she knew something they didn't. The Vraxians had locked her in the wrong room. The hum of the interrogation vault was constant now, a low drone that filled the chamber. To the Vraxian officers outside, it was just a sign that the interrogation was progressing, the machine working its usual magic. But inside, Evelyn could feel the system flickering, struggling to keep up. The vault, designed to break her, was beginning to bend. The first illusion began to fade. The smiling faces of her parents twisted, their features blurring and warping into chaotic forms. They had been so real moments ago, the memory of them smiling at her from a childhood photo, a warm memory dredged up by the vault system. But now they were falling apart. Evelyn let out a breath, the tension easing from her shoulders. She could feel the vault's code unraveling, and it was glorious. For the first time in years, she was no longer fighting to survive. She was fighting to control. The Vraxian officers watching through the observation window shifted uneasily. They had expected her to crumble by now, to beg, to scream. Instead, she stood there, her eyes half-lidded in calm concentration. Her face was almost serene, as if she were solving a puzzle, not facing her worst fears. "Impossible," muttered one of the officers, a low-ranking Vraxian named Captain Drac. He had been the one to oversee the interrogation process. How is she doing this?" "She's human. She can't." Another officer, Lieutenant Valak, started to protest, but his voice trailed off as he watched the vault flicker again. Inside the vault, Evelyn took another steady breath, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides. The walls around her, once solid and unyielding, felt different now. She could feel them, feel their weaknesses. The vault was powerful, yes, but it was still just a machine that needed data, and data could be manipulated. Her mind raced as she accessed the code she had already started altering. At first, it had been small things, tiny errors in the AI's responses, misdirections in the sensory overloads. But now, she was diving deeper. She had inserted a line of code earlier in the simulation that would cause the AI to misread her reactions, to confuse its own parameters, and force it to question its readings. Every time it tried to create a new illusion, she was rewiring it to feed back on itself. It wasn't just resisting her, it was self-destructing. As the Vraxians outside watched in stunned silence, the vault systems began to glitch in real time. The lights flickered once more. "Get the backup system online," Captain Drac barked. Lieutenant Valek scrambled at the console, typing furiously. "It's not responding. It's overriding our control." Evelyn smiled. She hadn't just taken control of the vault, she had turned it into a trap for them. She knew how the Vraxians operated, how they thought. Their arrogance was their weakness, and now she was exploiting it. Back in the vault, the illusions grew more intense. Now they were trying to create unbearable pain. Waves of heat, flashes of cold, the sensation of suffocation filled her mind. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, but even as the simulation twisted, Evelyn remained focused. She knew these tricks. She had studied every form of psychological warfare. They were nothing compared to the pressure she had faced before. But the vault wasn't prepared for this kind of fight. As the pressure mounted, Evelyn reached deeper into the system, forcing the AI to isolate the data feeds. The intense heat faded. The suffocating feeling evaporated. The officers outside were now watching in disbelief. They could see the systems flickering. The vault, which had always been perfect at breaking its prisoners, was beginning to fail. "The system's malfunctioning," Valek muttered, tapping at the control board in panic. "The AI, it's not working right. We need to get control back." But Evelyn wasn't done yet. With a calm, almost detached smile, she whispered to herself, "It's too late." She had already accessed the central control systems, overriding the AI's programming. The vault was now hers. The walls shifted. The floor changed, and what had once been a cold, calculating room of torment began to alter, taking on the very shape she desired. The simulation had stopped trying to overwhelm her. Instead, it began to feel lost. It couldn't figure her out anymore. Evelyn took a deep breath, stepping forward to the center of the room. As the Vraxian officers stared at the flickering, malfunctioning screens, Evelyn's voice rang clear through the vault speakers. "This room," she said with a smile, "is mine now." The officers flinched as the lights dimmed, and suddenly the vault's viewports began to display a message, one she had written herself. "I programmed this room." The Vraxian soldiers outside stared at the screens, wide-eyed. The system that had once been their weapon of torture had become her weapon of escape. The vault was still theirs, but now it was operating according to her rules. Evelyn's calm, focused expression never wavered as she stood in the center of the room. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was the one in control. "What have you done?" Captain Drac demanded, his voice trembling. Evelyn turned to face the observation window, a faint smirk crossing her lips. "What I've done is make sure you never underestimate a human again." She reached toward the control panel and in a single, fluid motion shut down the vault's main systems. The walls stopped shifting, the pain stopped, the images stopped. The system powered down entirely. For the first time since her capture, Evelyn felt the weight in her chest lift. The machine, the one designed to break her, had failed. She stepped forward toward the now deactivated vault. As she approached the door, the Vraxians outside scrambled to react, but it was too late. The vault had already betrayed them. She was free, and there was no one who could stop her now. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Evelyn stepped into the corridor beyond. She was still bound by cuffs, still surrounded by guards, but she had already won. "Captain," Evelyn called out to the officers standing frozen outside the vault, "I believe you have a few systems to fix. Don't worry. I'll be out of your hair soon enough." As the Vraxians scrambled to regain control, Evelyn walked away, her heart beating steadily in her chest. They had locked her in the vault, but they didn't realize one simple fact. She had programmed this room. The halls of the Vraxian warship were silent as Evelyn moved quickly, her mind still racing with the control she had over the vault. She could hear the faint hum of the ship's engines in the distance, but the most distinct sound was the beating of her own heart. It was steady, calm. She had done what seemed impossible. She had taken the vault's control from the Vraxians. She had outsmarted them, and now she was free. But freedom came with its own set of challenges. Evelyn knew that she couldn't stay on the ship for long. The Vraxians would realize what had happened soon enough, and they would do everything in their power to stop her. The guards, the officers, the entire system that had been built to break her, it would all be turned against her now. The Vraxians wouldn't forgive her for what she had done. Evelyn took a sharp turn down a narrow corridor, glancing over her shoulder. She hadn't seen anyone yet, but she knew they were close. The ship's internal communications had been completely shut down by her earlier manipulation of the vault. The Vraxians wouldn't be able to send orders directly, but that didn't mean they were unaware. They were resourceful, relentless, and they would come for her. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. She spun quickly, her body moving faster than the guards could react. She slammed into the nearest guard, knocking him to the floor, and before he could regain his footing, she grabbed his stun baton. It was a simple tool, but in Evelyn's hands, it was a weapon of survival. The other guard reached for his weapon, but she was already on him, disarming him with a quick twist and knocking him unconscious with a precise strike. Her breath was steady, but her pulse was quickening. This was what it had all been leading to, the moment she needed to prove not just to the Vraxians, but to herself, that humans could survive. Humans could fight back. Evelyn didn't pause to check if there were more guards coming. Instead, she sprinted through the hallways, her eyes scanning for any exits. The ship was a maze, a labyrinth of metal and security systems that would have been impossible for anyone else to navigate in such a short amount of time. But she wasn't like anyone else. She knew the ship's systems, the escape routes, the weaknesses in the security net. She had hacked them before. Now she just had to use them. On the bridge, Captain Drac was seething with frustration. The vault systems were still down, and the crew had no idea what was happening inside it. The prisoners, the systems, the whole interrogation protocol had been compromised. The reports from the lower levels were all coming back scrambled, and no one could confirm Evelyn's current location. "She's out there somewhere," Drac muttered, slamming his fist into the console. "She's the one who's been making a fool of us from the beginning." "Captain, we can't access the internal security channels," Lieutenant Valak reported, his voice strained. "The vault's breach must have corrupted the entire network. We're working on a workaround, but it's going to take time." "We don't have time," Drac snapped. "Get me a squad on the lower levels. I want every single corridor locked down, and if she's still alive, I want her brought to me now." Evelyn was moving quickly, weaving through the ship's maze-like corridors. She could hear distant sounds of the Vraxian officers trying to restore order, but it didn't matter now. She had a head start, and that was all she needed. She rounded another corner and came face to face with a door labeled Control Access. It was locked, but to Evelyn, it was just another challenge. She quickly hacked into the door's control panel, her fingers flying over the keypad. She had access to the ship's systems, not the full systems, but enough to make this work. The door clicked open, and she stepped inside, quickly closing it behind her. The room was small but filled with the tools she needed. A small terminal for navigation, an array of communication equipment, and most importantly, a map of the ship's layout. Evelyn scanned the map. She had to move fast. The ship's escape pods were located in the lower levels, but they were heavily guarded. She needed to find a way to slip past the Vraxians without being detected. Fortunately, she had the advantage of knowing the ship's blueprints and the location of its weaker systems. She knew where the blind spots were and where she could slip through unnoticed. The ship's alarm systems suddenly blared, red lights flashing across the room. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't panic. She'd expected this. The Vraxians had finally realized what had happened. They were locking down every section of the ship, increasing the pressure. But it was too late. Evelyn was already ahead of them. Her fingers danced over the terminal's controls. She disabled the security lockdowns in the areas she'd mapped out earlier, opening a path to the lower decks. The alarm didn't stop, but she had made her move. Now, all she had to do was get to the pods, and then... Bang! A sharp sound echoed through the room, followed by a loud thud. Evelyn froze, her eyes darting to the door. She hadn't heard anyone approach. Slowly, she turned back to the terminal. The door wasn't secure, and if someone was coming, there was no time to lose. Evelyn moved quickly, ducking into the shadows. A team of Vraxian guards had arrived, their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. They passed by the door, not noticing the slight change in the air. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, but she stayed still, every muscle tense, waiting. She didn't dare breathe. The guards moved on, and Evelyn took her chance. She darted to the terminal, turned off the last security locks, and opened the hatch to the lower levels. She was in. The escape pods were just ahead. But just as she stepped into the corridor, a voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Evelyn Brooks," Captain Drack's voice boomed. "You can run, but you cannot escape. You are still a prisoner of the Vraxian Empire." Evelyn smirked as she moved faster, heading straight for the pod bay. "I'll take my chances." The doors to the escape pod slid open, and Evelyn stepped inside. She strapped herself in, her mind racing. The engines roared to life. The Vraxians might have thought they had captured her, but Evelyn had always known. In the game of survival, the Vraxians were just another obstacle to overcome. The pod blasted off into space, leaving the Vraxian ship behind. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had escaped. And now the galaxy would learn that humans could not be captured, not by force and not by technology. Evelyn Brooks was free. And the Vraxians would learn what it meant to underestimate humanity. The escape pod rocketed away from the Vraxian warship, the cold vastness of space enveloping it like a quiet, waiting shadow. Evelyn Brooks sat in the cramped cockpit, her fingers tight on the controls, her breath steady. She didn't dare relax, not yet. The adrenaline from the escape was still rushing through her veins, making her heart race. She could still hear the alarms blaring through the ship's corridors in her mind, still see the faces of the Vraxian officers outside the vault as they scrambled to regain control. But now, they were nothing more than a fading memory. For the first time since her capture, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. She had done it. She had outsmarted them. The Vraxian Empire, with all its technology and all its might, had failed to break her. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, its ability to adapt, and she had proven it. The escape was just the beginning, though. The Vraxians wouldn't stop until they had her back. She knew that. They would send every ship in their fleet after her, but Evelyn had a plan. She wasn't going to run and hide forever. She was going to use this victory to ignite something much bigger. Back aboard the Vraxian warship, chaos reigned. Captain Drack paced back and forth on the bridge, his claws clenched in frustration. The crew was in disarray, scrambling to restore order after Evelyn's unexpected escape. The vault systems were still down, its AI scrambled beyond recognition. The ship's communications were jammed. They couldn't reach their fleet, and they couldn't locate the escape pod. "Find her," Drack bellowed, his voice sharp with fury. "I don't care if we have to tear apart every planet in this sector. Find her." The officers at the control consoles worked furiously. trying to trace the escape pod's trajectory, but every system was compromised. Drax's anger only grew as more reports came in, each one confirming that their resources were stretched too thin to immediately mount a proper search. One of the officers turned toward him, his face pale with concern. "Captain, we've tried to re-establish contact with the main fleet, but all channels are being blocked. We can't track her pod with the standard protocol either. It's as if she anticipated our every move." Drax slammed his fist into the console. "She didn't anticipate anything. She's human. She just got lucky." His voice was tinged with disbelief. "I'll remind you all that she is still one prisoner. We'll hunt her down and put her back in that vault, no matter how many tricks she thinks she can play." But deep down, Drax knew that something had changed. Something he couldn't ignore. The Vraxians had always prided themselves on their intelligence, their technology, their power. And here was a human, outsmarting them, escaping with nothing more than her wits and a small piece of technology she had hacked. She wasn't just another prisoner to be broken. She was a symbol of humanity's defiance. Evelyn's escape was just the beginning, but her next move was already in motion. The pod sped through space, heading for a hidden human base in the outer reaches of the galaxy. She had access to data on the Vraxian Empire, stolen secrets, codes, blueprints, enough information to turn the tables. She sat back in the pod's seat, her eyes closed, listening to the hum of the engine. The escape was a victory, yes, but it had come at a cost. She was alone, and though she was free from the Vraxians, she wasn't free from the weight of what she had just done. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The human resistance was still fractured, scattered across the galaxy. But now they had a message. They had proof that they could stand up against the Vraxian Empire, that their technology could be hacked, their systems could be broken. And Evelyn was determined to be the spark that lit the fire. As the pod neared its destination, Evelyn accessed the encrypted communications system. She sent out a signal, one that would reach the leaders of the human resistance. It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of her experience, the weight of her survival. "We're not just surviving anymore. It's time to take the fight to them." She knew that message would reach its destination, and that it would resonate. Humanity was tired of being seen as weak, as a species that needed protection. They had been underestimated for too long. It was time to show the galaxy what they were capable of. Back on the Vraxian warship, the officers began to regroup. They had tried to send out a fleet to track down Evelyn's escape pod, but it was too late. The ship's scanners detected nothing. Evelyn had vanished into the blackness of space, and they were left with nothing but failure. Captain Drax stood at the helm, his jaw clenched in frustration. "She's out there somewhere," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And when we find her, we will make sure she regrets ever defying the Vraxian Empire." But even as he spoke those words, a small part of him wondered if it wasn't too late. Evelyn had already broken their systems, hacked their most secure protocols. She had proven that no matter how much power the Vraxians had, they couldn't control everything. She had done what they had thought was impossible, and that made her more dangerous than any weapon they could ever create. Evelyn's pod descended toward the human base, a small hidden outpost tucked away in the outer regions of the galaxy. As the pod's hatch opened and she stepped out onto solid ground, she was greeted by a small group of resistance fighters. Their faces were tired, their clothes worn, but there was a spark in their eyes now, a spark that hadn't been there before. One of the fighters, a young woman named Mara, stepped forward. "We heard what you did. You broke the Vraxian vault. You escaped. You're a symbol now, Evelyn." Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was a smile of determination. "I'm not a symbol, I'm a reminder that we can fight back. The Vraxians have underestimated us for too long. We're going to change that." As the sun rose over the hidden base, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. This was the start of something much bigger. The Vraxian Empire had made one critical mistake. They had thought she was just another prisoner to be broken. And now, the entire galaxy would know that humanity was not just capable of surviving, they were capable of winning. Evelyn stood on the makeshift command platform, looking out over the small base. The sky above was a dull gray, the stars only faintly visible through the thin atmosphere of the distant world. Despite the bleakness of the landscape, there was something in the air that made her feel alive. The base, a hidden outpost on the fringes of the galaxy, had once been just a place for scattered rebels to regroup. But now, with the message she had sent out, it had become the beginning of something much bigger. Resistance fighters moved around her, preparing for their next steps. They were humans, tired, scarred, and worn from years of running and hiding. But their eyes, like the eyes of the soldiers in the Vraxian Empire, were sharp with purpose. They weren't running anymore. Evelyn had given them something they hadn't had before: hope. Mara, the young fighter who had greeted her when she landed, approached. Her face was serious, but there was a fire behind her eyes. "The message you sent out has already spread. We've got allies coming in from all over. It's not just us anymore. It's a whole movement." Evelyn nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "We have to be ready. The Vraxians won't let us build this resistance without a fight." Mara's voice was steady, but there was a trace of fear in it. "We know, but they've underestimated us for too long. What we've been doing, what you've done, shows them that we can stand up to them, that we can beat them." Evelyn turned away from Mara and looked back at the base. The past few days had been a whirlwind. She had sent out the message, informing the scattered remnants of the human resistance that they no longer had to hide. They were no longer a fringe group. They were a force, and the galaxy was about to see that. But it wasn't just about rallying the troops. They had to be prepared to face the Vraxians head-on. The galaxy's most powerful empire wasn't going to crumble overnight. The fight was going to be long and brutal. Evelyn was ready for that. She had no choice but to be. The days that followed were filled with planning and coordination. They moved quickly, gathering supplies, recruiting more fighters, and establishing secure communication networks. The human resistance began to take shape, and Evelyn found herself working harder than ever before, not just as a programmer but as a leader. Her role had evolved. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore, she was fighting for the future of humanity. In the command room, a large map of the galaxy was projected across the walls. It was filled with blinking lights, representing known Vraxian forces. But there were also new markers, human resistance cells popping up across systems. Each one was a beacon of hope, a spark of defiance in the darkness. Vraxian patrols have been reported near Sector 12. One of the fighters, a grizzled man named Jace, said, "We've had to move a few of our outposts. They're getting aggressive." Evelyn's mind was already calculating. "We can't stay hidden forever. They're going to find us no matter what. It's time we hit back." Jace raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a counterattack?" "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "We've got intel on their patrol routes, their weak points. We hit them where it hurts. We take out their supply lines, their communication hubs. We cripple them from the inside. We make them see that we're a threat." A murmur of approval ran through the room. The idea of striking back, of not just surviving but fighting, lit a fire in the hearts of the resistance fighters. They weren't just outlaws anymore. They were a movement, and they had a plan. Days passed, and the first coordinated strike of the resistance was set into motion. They had located a Vraxian supply station on a remote planet in the Glear system. It wasn't heavily guarded, but it was a key resource point. If they could take it out, they would slow down the Vraxian war machine, even if only for a few days. And in those few days, the resistance would grow stronger. Evelyn was at the forefront, her hand on the controls of a small fighter ship. The Vraxian fleet was still too strong for a full-scale attack, but this was different. This was a surgical strike. She would lead the charge, along with a small team of resistance pilots. The goal wasn't to destroy everything. It was to send a message. "We're not just pawns in their game," she said as she looked out at the stars ahead. "We are humans. We fight back." Mara, sitting in the co-pilot seat, glanced over at her. "And we'll win." The mission was a success. They breached the Vraxian defenses with precision, using the element of surprise. The supply station was destroyed in a brilliant explosion of fire and debris. Evelyn watched as the Vraxian ship scrambled to respond, but it was too late. They had already delivered their blow. As the Resistance fighters made their escape, the excitement on the comms was palpable. Victory had never tasted sweeter, but Evelyn's mind wasn't focused on the small win. This was just the first step. The message had been sent not just to the Vraxians, but to every Resistance cell, every human hiding in the shadows. "We are not your prey." The Vraxians weren't going to take this lying down. Within hours, the news of the attack reached their command centers. Captain Drac, who had been relentlessly pursuing Evelyn, gritted his teeth as he read the reports. "They've attacked us, humans." His voice was laced with disbelief and anger. "They don't know what they've done." He slammed his fist into the console. "Prepare the fleet. I want those Resistance cells wiped out, all of them." Back on the Resistance base, Evelyn stood before a group of fighters, her face calm but her eyes burning with determination. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice steady. "The Vraxians are going to come for us. They're going to throw everything they have at us, but we're ready. We will win, and we'll show the galaxy that humanity isn't just a species to be ignored. We are here." The room was silent for a moment, then a cheer rose from the fighters. The morale was high, the confidence soaring. Evelyn's plan was taking shape. She wasn't just leading a small group of rebels anymore. She was leading a revolution. The Vraxians had made their first mistake by underestimating humanity. They had no idea what they were up against, and Evelyn was about to prove that the galaxy's most underestimated species was the one that would change everything. The stars stretched into light as Evelyn's ship rocketed through space. She didn't look back. The mission had been a success, but the true test was still ahead of them. The strike on the Vraxian supply station had sent a ripple across the galaxy, but it was just one battle in a much larger war. A war they were only beginning to fight. As the small Resistance fleet made its way back to the hidden base, the comms buzzed with excitement. The Vraxians were scrambling to respond, but they hadn't expected such a quick and precise attack. They had underestimated the humans once again. Evelyn sat back in her pilot's seat, staring out at the vastness of space. The thought of what lay ahead sent a thrill through her. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity wasn't afraid. They weren't going to back down. Not anymore. Back aboard the Vraxian flagship, Captain Drac was furious. His face was twisted in a snarl as he stared at the damage reports from the Glear system. The humans had struck them in a way they had never seen before. The attack had been fast, clean, and precise. They had lost an entire supply station, a critical asset for their operations in the sector. And the most frustrating part was that they didn't even see it coming. The humans had learned how to fight back. "I want those human cells wiped out," Drac ordered, his voice a low growl. "No more mercy, no more hesitation. Find them and destroy them." His second-in-command, a tall Vraxian officer with a dark crest, nodded. "We've already dispatched multiple fleets to track down their location, but we'll need more time to pinpoint their base. They've gone to ground, and we've lost their signal." "I don't care how long it takes," Drac said coldly. "We will break them. No one makes a mockery of the Vraxian Empire, not even the humans." On the human Resistance base, Evelyn gathered her team in the command center. The mood was a mixture of exhilaration and determination. They had struck their first blow, but they knew it was only the beginning. The Vraxians would come for them with everything they had. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. "We've taken a small victory," Evelyn began, her voice steady but strong. "But the Vraxians won't stop until they've wiped us out. We need to be ready." Mara, the young fighter who had become one of her closest allies, spoke up. "We've already proven they're not invincible. We have what they don't: the element of surprise, the will to fight, and our own intelligence. We can win this." Evelyn nodded. "That's right, but we need more. We need to hit them where it hurts. We've got intel on a Vraxian fleet gathering in the Rylak sector. They're preparing to launch an all-out assault on any human cells they can find. We strike first, before they even know what hit them." The Resistance members around her exchanged glances, their expressions hardening with resolve. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future. Jace, the grizzled fighter who had seen more battles than he cared to remember, stepped forward. "How do we take on a fleet that size? Even with all the tech we've stolen, they outnumber us." Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she stared at the map projected before her. "We don't need to take on the whole fleet. We hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and cripple their defenses. If we make it hurt enough, they'll hesitate. They won't be able to focus on us and everything else at once." Mara looked at Evelyn, her voice full of belief. "You're right. We'll force them to fight on our terms. We won't give them a chance to regroup." Evelyn's lips curled into a determined smile. "Exactly. We take the fight to them. We show them we're not just hiding, we're fighting for our lives." The plan was set into motion quickly. Evelyn and her team mobilized the fighters and technicians, prepping their ships and weapons. The attack on the Vraxian fleet wasn't going to be easy, but Evelyn had a feeling it was their best chance. It was a high-risk, high-reward mission, but then again, she didn't know how to play it any other way. The Resistance fleet was small but fast, and Evelyn's strategy was simple: hit them fast, hit them hard, and get out before the Vraxians could retaliate. They would strike in the dead of night, using the cover of space to sneak past enemy radar and then tear apart the fleet's communication networks. Evelyn gathered the pilots in the hangar, giving them a final briefing before they boarded their ships. "Listen up," she said, her voice steady, carrying the weight of their mission. "This isn't just about taking down a few ships. This is about sending a message. We're not a random group of rebels. We are humanity, and we fight for each other. We fight for our future. Stay sharp, and stay alive." One by one, the pilots nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They weren't just doing this for survival. They were doing it for something much bigger: the future of humanity. The night of the strike, the Resistance fleet moved quietly through space, their ships gliding like shadows among the stars. Evelyn piloted the lead ship, her hands steady on the controls as they approached the Vraxian fleet's last known position. She could feel the tension building among the crew, but she stayed calm. She had a plan, and it was going to work. It had to. As they neared the target, Evelyn glanced at the readout. The Vraxian fleet was spread out, too large to ignore, but there were gaps they could exploit. "We're in position," Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. "Everyone on my mark, get in, get out, no heroics." The countdown began. Seconds felt like hours. The tension was unbearable, the silence in the comms like a pressure in her chest. "Now," Evelyn whispered. The Resistance fleet struck. It was a well-coordinated attack, with ships darting in and out of the Vraxian fleet's range, hitting key targets with precision. The Vraxians scrambled to respond, but the Resistance had the upper hand. The surprise was their greatest weapon. In a matter of minutes, key communication hubs were destroyed, and their supply routes were disrupted. The Vraxian fleet was in chaos. As Evelyn watched the enemy ships scramble to regain control, she smiled. The Vraxians had been caught off guard. They had underestimated humanity once again. But this time, the consequences would be different. Back aboard the Vraxian flagship, Captain Drac watched as his fleet fell into disarray. His teeth ground together in fury. "How did they know? How did they get this far?" he demanded. "They're humans," one of his officers said, shaking his head. "They've learned how to fight back." Drac's expression twisted into a snarl. "This ends now. Prepare for retaliation. We will show them what it means to challenge the might of the Vraxian Empire." Evelyn didn't feel fear. She felt pride. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. And this was only the beginning. The aftermath of their victory was both exhilarating and terrifying. The Vraxian fleet, though temporarily disrupted, was not gone. They had struck a decisive blow, yes, but the Vraxians would not rest until they had retaliated. The tension that hung over the human resistance base was palpable, a quiet hum of anticipation and fear. They had achieved a small victory, but Evelyn knew that it was only the first step in a much larger, more dangerous fight. For the first time since their mission began, the resistance fighters gathered in the command center, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The base was now a hive of activity as new recruits arrived, bringing with them hope and fear in equal measure. The attack had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but Evelyn's message had gone farther than she anticipated. Humanity was finally starting to show its strength. But the Vraxians were not to be underestimated. They had already started regrouping, planning their next move. Captain Drac was relentless in his pursuit. The Vraxian Empire's wrath was coming, and it would be unlike anything the Resistance had faced before. Evelyn could feel the storm building on the horizon, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the Vraxians would bring everything they had. Evelyn stood before the map of the galaxy, her eyes tracing the movements of the Vraxian fleet. The lines were shifting constantly, as if the enemy was trying to predict their next move. Her hands hovered over the console, as though she could physically will the future into her favor. The map was more than just a plan. It was a guide for what needed to be done. "We've pushed them back once, but we can't expect another miracle," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of responsibility. "We need to hit them harder, faster. We don't have time to wait." Mara, who had been by her side throughout this entire fight, stepped forward. "What do we do now? We've already taken out their communication hubs. What's next?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "We hit them where it hurts. They're coming after us with everything they've got. We need to attack their homeworld, the heart of the Vraxian Empire. If we can break their center, their will to fight will crumble." The room fell silent. The idea of striking at the core of the Vraxian Empire was bold, audacious, and dangerous. But Evelyn had already proven that they could do the impossible. She was no longer just a hacker or a fighter. She was the leader of a revolution, and this was the fight that would define their future. Meanwhile, aboard the Vraxian flagship, Captain Drac's frustration had reached its boiling point. The attack on the supply station had shaken the Vraxian Empire to its core. For the first time in centuries, they had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered by a species they had long considered weak. Humans were nothing but a nuisance, a fleeting species unworthy of their attention. But that had changed. Now they were a threat. "They've crossed the line," Drac snarled, slamming his fist onto the control panel. "We will end them, every last one." The officer beside him, a tall Vraxian with sharp, angled features, hesitated before speaking. "Captain, they've shown resilience. They've shown ingenuity. They know our tactics. We can't just crush them in the same way we've dealt with lesser species." There, he paused, trying to find the right words, different. Drac's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll make them regret thinking they could ever challenge the Vraxian Empire." The bridge erupted with activity as Drac ordered a full-scale assault on the human resistance. His mind was consumed with a single thought. The humans had embarrassed him. He couldn't allow it to go unpunished. Back at the resistance base, Evelyn stood before her team. They had gathered in a darkened room, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. The time for planning was over. Now they would face the Vraxians head-on. "The Vraxian fleet is coming for us," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "They think they can break us, but we're not backing down. We've made our mark on them, and now we finish this. Together." Mara stepped forward, determination etched into her features. "What's the plan?" Evelyn looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person in the room. These were the ones who had believed in her in the fight, and now they were ready to take the battle to the Vraxians. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. "We go to their homeworld," Evelyn said, her voice low but filled with an undeniable fire. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We make them face us on our terms. We take the fight to their doorstep. We show them that humanity doesn't bend. We don't break, and we will never stop fighting." The room erupted into cheers. The fighters, the engineers, the pilots, they were all in. They understood the risks, but they knew they couldn't turn back now. This was the moment, the turning point in a war that had only just begun. The Resistance fleet, now united and stronger than ever, began their journey toward the heart of the Vraxian Empire. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Every fighter, every ship, and every soul on board knew what was at risk. This would be their final stand. As they approached the Vraxian homeworld, the tension was unbearable. Evelyn stood at the front of the fleet, her eyes focused on the distant planet. She could feel the weight of their mission, the weight of her responsibility, but she also felt something else: confidence, hope. She had always known that humanity was capable of more than they were given credit for. Now they were proving it to the galaxy. A voice crackled through the comms, a warning that echoed in Evelyn's ears. "The Vraxians are here. They're ready for us." Evelyn took a deep breath. "Then we meet them head-on. We fight until the very end." The final battle was upon them. As the two fleets collided in the vast emptiness of space, Evelyn's heart raced. But this time she wasn't alone. She had an army at her back. They were more than just rebels now. They were humanity, united, unyielding, and unstoppable. For the first time, the Vraxians would understand the true power of the humans they had underestimated. As the chaos of the battle raged on, Evelyn's voice rang out through the comms, her words a rallying cry to every fighter. "This is our moment. We fight for each other. We fight for our future. We will never stop." And with that, humanity's fight for survival became a fight for victory. The Vraxians might have had the technology, but humanity had something far stronger: their unwavering will to fight, to survive, and to win.